Hello everybody, this is the John Crow, and I'm sitting in the Game Maker 0.8 right now, and I'm going to be putting together a few videos just on a bunch of the new things that have been implemented. And so I think I'll go through them kind of feature by feature, and then I'll start to look at how we can kind of combine them to make new tools. I was listening to the live stream with Kamasazi and Lucas earlier today. This is January 21st, I believe. And they were sort of talking about how a lot of the tools that we would hack out in pre-0.8 versions of the Game Maker are now kind of embedded as new higher level tools, which to me suggests that we'll be able to take the higher level tools and make even more higher level emergent tools that weren't really anticipated by devs. So I think there's going to be a lot of these like just mind-blowing moments as we develop a little bit more of our understanding of just what the ramifications are of 0.8. So I think maybe the first place that I'm going to start with is down here in the shelf, and you'll notice there's a logic section in the shelf, and the logic asset, or the logic entity, is there to replace any of your number pad behavior. And this is really large because number pads take up a bit of overhead, depending on what type of asset you're using. So the traditional numpad that we used had 20 or 30 faces, I believe. Some of the ones I use, the letters have a bunch of faces, although they're static. And these ones have very little, not no overhead, but they'll have very little overhead, and they won't render to the game itself when you're actually tabbing into the game. So for example, if I look at a logic asset and I drop it down, it shows up. It actually looks very smooth, like a polygon asset would be that's been subdivided. But you'll notice as I tab into the game that it's not there at all, and there's no collisions or anything like that. So this is where we're going to build all of our logic using the same behaviors and components. One thing I noticed when you're working with the behaviors is that when you first open up the behaviors list, they're all set to single player, and a lot of the tools that were released in the new version of 0.8 aren't here, and it has a lot to do with the type over on the right side here. And I wish you could set this as a default, but ideally you're going to want to be in the synchronized set of behaviors and components to reveal more of them. But this changes back every single time to client only for whatever reason. So the first thing I'm going to start with is some of the newer ones, and I'm going to start down here with the weather switcher. This is very cool because if you wanted to suggest day to night changes, you couldn't in version 0.7, anything 0.7 and before, 0.713 I guess technically. But in here, the weather switcher allows you to use messages to trigger that. And so if I hit tab right now and I tab into the game, you'll see already that the clouds in the sky have changed. It looks a little bit different than what we're used to. And I could always go into the global parameters and I could switch the ambience up. I could start with like nighttime lighting, but I could never easily switch between nighttime and daytime. I would dig underground and maybe make a nighttime scene and a daytime scene above ground. But again, it was all a bit of a hack. In this case here, I'm going to start off with I'm just going to start with a neutral environment, so nothing really going on here. And I'm going to make all the changes through the weather logic. So we can actually take the preset and use the same presets that are available to us in the ambience slider. I think there's an extra one like noon intense that we can use, but I wanted to make a switch between two different states. So let's do a traditional nighttime switch, and I'll duplicate that, and we'll also make a daytime switch, or we'll make it a noon switch. At the moment, the tools themselves are not going to do anything because their default state is to wait for a message, and that's probably the ideal way to work. If I turn them off, then you can see if I turn them off, I've automatically got my noon weather here, and if I turn this one off, I've got my nighttime weather. So if I turn them both off, I think they're just both going to fight one another. Well, one defaults anyways. Maybe it's the first one that I set. I'm not really sure what the answer is there. I'm going to leave the message on, and you could use just traditional messages to build this up. So the message to switch, you could add a message, and that message could be, let's see, which is this one? This one is the noon shot. So you could say like noon.on, and this one here could use night.on. And you could traditionally go with, a speaker component that triggers them based on the avatar. If I made 2 hotspots, and I put down a logic asset on both of them, and let's set up a synchronized. I'm going to set up the speaker component, and we're just going to detect the entity. The detect entity is quite large to begin with. I'm not sure what this blue one is here. I don't see any entry for it on the entity, but detect entity, the range I'm going to say is 1.5, and it's going to send the message out to everything, and that message is going to be night.on on this one. I'm going to broadcast to everything. I'm going to broadcast, I'm going to leave it at once for now, and then I'll do the same thing over here. We'll just go and drop on a synchronized speaker component. We'll detect it within the same 1.5 radius, and we don't need the hello, we don't need the display duration, and this one will be, what was it, noon.on. Broadcast to everything. So now as I walk between those 2 elements, I've got my night shot, and I can switch over to my day. If I try this back and forth, I think this is only going to work once based on what I've set it to. So there's my noon. There's the night. Oh, so this just switches back and forth. So even though it only says once, it actually means once every time you move away from it and step back onto it again. So if I was to come in here and let's say the message duration, just to see what forever says, delay between broadcasts. And let's do the same thing here. So I've got a delay between both broadcasts of 1 second. The broadcast duration is forever. Not really sure how that's going to work, but let's switch this to night. And I'm standing on here, so nothing's going to change until I move over here. We're going to get the switch. Okay, so now we're getting a conflict between the 2 of them. If I switch back to this one, we're going to constantly have that message triggering on and off. So what this is really saying is that every 1 second, the night on, noon on messages are going to turn on and off every 1 second. So we don't really want that. I would suggest we should then take this to once. And this will now coincide with every time we're in a specific area. We could do time-based switches as well. And most of the time people would think about using the basic platform to do that. So the old school behavior might be to take a, let's say, a logic asset. We could attach a platform behavior to it. And let's say I'm going to set this to 6. I think that would be 8, 7. And let's have it take a travel speed of 1 block per second, and we'll wait for say 1 second on either end. And what we want to do is give this a tag. We'll give it the tag slider. So right now this is detecting an entity. The detection type is every avatar in range. Let's detect specific tags in range, and I'm going to detect the specific tag slider. Do the same thing over here. So this speaker component has changed somewhat as well too. Let's go with specific tags in range, and let's set that to slider. And if I move my slider over top of the 2 of them, and I give it the tag slider, we should now have a day to night switcher. So we're going from night. As it reaches the end, it should switch to day. It's going to wait for a second and slide back over to the nights section. Again, a 2-second pause, and then back to the day section. Okay, so that would be one way of working that behavior. The other way, however, I'm going to move this out of the way. Let's move this one back. Let's get rid of this. Would be to take advantage of the new timed behavior, and let's take a look at that. I believe it's not available to us from within the logic asset as a preset. What I'm going to do is bring in a new one. Let's call this a logic asset. Let's call this a timed event. And I think in this case, I'm going to switch over to the synchronized behaviors. I'm going to look for my timed events, which is only available to the multiplayer. And I'm going to use one of these boxes here to trigger the timed event. So just have my character stepping inside of it for now. So let's go switch the detect entity back to every avatar in range. And this time we're going to trigger the weather sequence. I'm going to broadcast to everyone, and I'm just going to broadcast this timed event once. And the message that I'm going to send is going to be used inside of the timed event. Trigger weather sequence. Wait for the message. And this could reset at the end of the last event triggered if I wanted to, say, trigger it again. But in order to create a timed event, I'm going to create an event name. So we're going to call this night to noon. And so think about the event as a very high-level container for what you're trying to do. And so the time that's taken to send this message when it receives the start message, I'm going to let this delay for 5 seconds. And the message that's going to start all of this, the night event off, would be, I think, night on. Yeah, so let me use the night on trigger. And it looks like it needs to be filtered by tags. I think you'd have to use a tag. I'm curious actually to know if you don't, because then you could technically use the timed event to trigger quest activations and things of that nature. So something to consider. And then I can actually run sub-events which become relative, almost like children of the main event, or I could trigger a brand new timed event. So kind of like parent events or child events. And you can see that there is a relative time based on when the parent is triggered. So let's say I have a noon that's triggered 5 seconds after the night has been triggered. So night on gets triggered, then 5 seconds waits, and then the noon gets triggered. And this message would be noon.on. And I'm going to set up tags on the noon.on. So noon.on is going to require the noon tag. Interesting that for tags you're having to accept them in sort of the same way that you would for messages. Not on labeling the tag, but on identifying the tags that you're sending messages out to. So 5 seconds night on, and I don't think this will work. I'm curious to know if this will work here. So my night on asset is not going to have a tag to begin with. So let's just try this out. I don't need this one. So I'm going to detect myself when I move into this area. It's going to send the message trigger weather sequence to everything. This is going to receive the message trigger weather sequence, and it's going to trigger out a night to noon transition with the night message on, sent to no tags. So let's see what happens here. So if I stand on top of this box, kind of as predicted, we get nothing happening because we haven't actually set up a tag. So I'm going to set up the, I'm going to call this my night tag. And I'm going to set up the night on with It's night tag here. Night tag. So now as I jump back out and I play my effect, I should be able to trigger that timed event. Am I standing in the wrong box? That's entirely possible. Oh, there we go. I think I was standing in the wrong box. There we go. So you can now see that it's transitioning from the night shot to the noon shot. Let me actually jump back into here. So it is on the actual light colored one. So actually, let me bring the box over here. There we go. So I step onto the box. It detects my avatar, sends out the trigger night sequence. And there we have our night sequence. 5 seconds later, we have our noon sequence. And we could kind of keep changing that, or chaining that if we wanted to. So I could then, say, trigger on a sunrise. We could have sunrise dot on. It's triggering the preset name sunrise, and if I edit that logic, nothing really to do there, but inside of the event timer, I could also run another sub-event inside of that by adding another sub-event. This sub-event name would be, actually I should give this one a name here. So this is my noon event. This one is going to be my sunrise event. So I'm kind of getting my day-night cycles messed up, but that's fine. And then relative to this one, I might again do another 5 seconds, and I might go to sunrise.on, and I'm going to send this to the sunrise tag. Let's add that. And of course I'm going to need to give this the appropriate tag. So it no longer has the noon tag, it's going to have the sunrise tag. So in terms of being able to chain together a number of these different weather events. So I'm going to step on. And actually once I've triggered it, I should be able to step off. And the message has already been sent, so we get the night transition. 5 seconds later, we get the noon transition. And interestingly here, that one transitioned a little bit too quickly there to the sunrise. And I'm guessing what's happening here is that the relative values are not working. So everything is going to be relative to the main sequence. So we have a 5 second delay from night to noon. 5 second delay here. I see. I'm going to add a sub-event instead. There we go. So let's call this the sunrise event. So I think what I did was I actually added it as a timed event as opposed to a sub-event, because the sub-event is again happening relative to the parent. So just getting used to just choosing between the right type of timer is obviously important. So now what we should have is 5, 10, 15. So this starts things off. As soon as I walk over the speaker, we get our noon event, or sorry, our night event starting, then our noon event following that, then our sunrise event following that. And I believe these two might not be correct. I think I might need to do a 10-second offset here, because everything is relative to the start time of night to noon. Let's just try it. So if I put both of these at the same time, and I walk onto my spot, and I walk off, we get our 5 second delay. We get night. We get another 5 second delay. And again, you can see that flash, and that flash is again because of that relativity. So I was right actually the first time, so I need to set this to like 10. So there's a delay of 5 seconds, and then after this has played, 5 seconds later the noon event will come in, and then 10 seconds after the primary event has started, then the sunrise event will start. So we come back in, trigger our weather sequence, so we get our night event, we get 5 seconds passing, and then our noon event, and then another 5 seconds will pass, and we get our sunrise event. And there we go. And I think it's not going to be set into a loop. If I wanted the loop to be set, then I would just make sure that inside of the event, we just have it. It resets at the end of the last event triggered. So I'm guessing it sets back to the default. So if the default is this clear sky, clear blue sky, and when I step on my speaker component, we're going to get the night, followed by noon, followed by sunrise, and it should revert back to the blue sky. Or if it doesn't, it's because I need to step back on the platform again, and then it would go back through the same process, going back to the night. There we go. Going back through noontime, and then back through sunrise, and it ends on the sunrise time unless you re-trigger the effect again. So I don't expect people will be doing too much of that, but yeah, just having this capability to switch between times of day or weather type of effects is pretty interesting. So that was just a short tutorial on the use of the new logic asset and the ability to trigger weather switching. I hope you learned something from this. There's going to be a lot of new V.8 tutorials to come. My name is the John Crow, and I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.